Okay, I want you to picture this. It is November 1980, and you are high up in the mountains of Sarnano, Italy.
And we are talking about a totally blinding whiteout snowstorm here.
Oh, completely enveloped in it. The biting cold is unreal. The wind is howling so fiercely, it just creates this deafening wall of sound. You know, the kind of cold that actually hurts your lungs when you try to breathe?
Right. Absolutely brutal conditions.
Yeah. So imagine two women sitting in a small, dark hatchback. They pull over onto a stretch of road that, surprisingly, has been cleared of deep snow. The car is functioning perfectly, the engine is warm.
Which is your only lifeline in that situation.
Exactly. But instead of staying inside with the heater running, just waiting for the storm to pass, they turn the ignition off, they lock the doors, they leave the keys sitting right there on the dashboard.
Ah.
And then they open the doors, step out into that freezing white void, and just walk off into the blizzard. And they are never seen alive again.
From a purely investigative standpoint, leaving the keys in the ignition and abandoning a perfectly functional shelter in extreme weather, it signals sheer immediate panic.
Because it goes against everything we're wired to do, right?
Exactly. It contradicts every basic human survival instinct. When human beings are faced with lethal elements, the biological drive is always to seek shelter and warmth.
Yeah, you hunker down.
Right. To willingly walk away from it means whatever was outside that car, or whoever was outside that car, was perceived as a more immediate threat than freezing to death.
Yeah, it's such a chilling thought.
Yep.
Well, welcome to this deep dive. Our mission today is to step directly into the shoes of a criminal investigator and examine the mechanics behind three notoriously baffling true crime mysteries.
And we pulled these specific cases from our source files because they share a really unsettling underlying current.
Yeah, they really do. We are going to trace a path from the sun-baked, crowded beaches of 1960s Indiana over to that snowy Italian peak we just talked about, and finally down to the quiet suburban duplexes of 1990s Nashville.
And the analytical framework we need to keep in mind as we evaluate the evidence today is this terrifying friction between the mundane and the malicious.
I like that phrasing.
Yeah, because these are not your standard missing persons cases. They are case studies in what happens when entirely ordinary routines like going to the beach or driving through the mountains or just sitting in your apartment suddenly collide with hidden, highly dangerous worlds. We're basically looking at the mechanics of erasure.
So let's start with the most public, mundane setting imaginable. It's the 4th of July weekend, 1966. We are at the Indiana Dunes State Park, right on the shores of Lake Michigan.
Prime summer holiday.
Oh, the beach is absolutely packed with thousands of holiday goers. But sitting casually on the sand is this neatly piled collection of items. There are purses with cash still inside, a thermos, sunglasses, some folded clothes, and a pair of shoes.
And these belong to three young women, right?
Yep. 19-year-old Patricia, 21-year-old Anne, and 19-year-old Renee. According to witnesses, around noon, the women waded into the water and boarded a small white powerboat operated by this tan, dark-haired man. And then they simply vanished.
Which is wild. And, law enforcement's initial theory just defaulted to accidental drowning. Lake Michigan is massive. It's over 22,000 square miles, and it's notoriously unpredictable.
But they didn't find anything, did they?
No, nothing at all. A massive multi-agency search of the water and the shoreline turned up zero physical evidence. No boat debris, no bodies.
So what do you do when the lake basically gives you nothing?
Well, when the environment yields no clues, investigators, like Sergeant Edward Burke, who led this case, they have to pivot to victimology. They start looking at the behavioral footprint of the missing.
Right.
But almost immediately, the investigation became completely bogged down by localized interpersonal drama.
Yeah, this is where it gets messy. Investigators found this unmailed letter in Renee's abandoned purse. It was addressed to her husband, and she was furious. She was basically threatening to leave him because he was spending too much time tinkering with his hot rods in the garage.
And authorities actually attempted to use that letter to frame a theory that the women orchestrated their own disappearance to start new lives.
Over a letter about hot rods?
I know, it sounds crazy, but we see this pattern constantly in older investigations. Taking a minor domestic grievance and inflating it to explain a catastrophic event.
But abandoning your cash, your identification, and your shoes on a public beach, that is not the behavior of someone executing a carefully planned relocation.
Not at all. It makes no sense.
And the theories only got wilder from there. There was this former reporter who pushed this elaborate narrative that the women actually boarded an illicit abortion boat.
Ah, yes. The offshore clinic theory.
Right. The claim was that this white power boat was a ferry taking women to a larger offshore medical vessel operating in secret. And the theory goes that when a procedure went fatally wrong, all three women had to be disposed of to protect the operation.
And it's important to note that this narrative gained significant traction in the public consciousness despite a complete lack of corroborating evidence.
Wait, I am honestly struggling with the basic logistics of this boat theory. I mean, it's like trying to force a puzzle piece from a completely different box just because the colors look similar.
That's a great way to put it.
Right, because if you are a criminal enterprise running a highly illegal secret medical operation, why would your pickup point be a public beach at high noon on the 4th of July, surrounded by thousands of witnesses? It makes zero logistical sense.
It doesn't. It fails every single test of operational security.
Yeah.
Criminal syndicates prioritize discretion above all else. You do not conduct illicit pickups in the middle of a massive holiday crowd.
So what was the real thread they should have been following?
Well, the real investigative thread was actually rooted in the women's daily routines back in Chicago. All three were deeply involved in the local equestrian scene. They rode horses competitively and socially.
And in 1960s Chicago, the equestrian scene was not just some quaint hobbyist community. It was heavily influenced and in many ways totally controlled by a violent criminal enterprise known as the Horse Syndicate.
Yeah, and at the center of this syndicate were two half-brothers, Silas and George Jane. And their dynamic was essentially a blood feud.
A very dangerous blood feud.
Very. Silas Jane operated deep in the criminal underworld, utilizing extortion and intimidation. His younger brother George, however, was running a highly successful, completely legitimate equestrian business.
Which obviously didn't sit well with Silas.
Exactly. Silas viewed George's legitimate success as a direct threat. And the escalation of their feud is a textbook example of organized crime bleeding into the civilian world.
We're not just talking about slashed tires here either.
No. Silas's associates were literally running George off the road. They affixed actual dynamite to the back door of George's home.
Oh my God.
And the violence peaked in 1965 when George asked a 22-year-old employee to just move his car for him. She turned the ignition and the car detonated. Silas's henchmen had rigged it with explosives.
A completely innocent woman killed instantly just for sitting in the wrong driver's seat, which honestly brings a terrifying context to Patricia, one of our missing women.
It really does.
Because in March of 1966, just a few months before she disappeared on that beach, Patricia showed up to meet a friend with a badly bruised face. She was crying, highly agitated, and she stated explicitly that she was in a lot of trouble with, quote, syndicate people.
And boom, the victimology suddenly snaps into focus. These three women rode at George Jane's stables. They were physically adjacent to an active, lethal mob war.
Right, they were right in the middle of it.
And remember, the items abandoned on the beach, they included a phone book that contained direct numbers for George Jane and Silas Jane's wife.
Oh, wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, add to that the discovery that a known associate of Silas owned a blue and white powerboat that was frequently docked near the Indiana Dunes.
Let me guess, he couldn't produce the boat for investigators.
Nope. When investigators pressed the associate's wife about the boat's location, she claimed it had conveniently burned in a fire shortly after the disappearance.
How convenient. But here is my question. If they were targeted by the syndicate, maybe because Patricia overheard something about the car bombing before Silas's upcoming trial, why stage a disappearance on a crowded beach?
It seems counterintuitive.
Yeah, because if the boat theory fails the operational security test for a medical procedure, why does it make sense for a mob hit?
Because the objective of the two crimes is entirely different. A secret medical procedure requires invisibility.
Okay, that makes sense.
But a mob assassination, especially one intended to silence witnesses,
Yeah.
often utilizes the psychology of the brazen act. It's about sending a message.
Ah, I see.
Pulling off a triple abduction in broad daylight in front of thousands of people and leaving absolutely no physical trace creates this spectacle of untouchability. It tells every other potential witness in Chicago, we can get to anyone, anywhere, even in a crowd, and the police cannot stop us.
The audacity is the weapon itself.
Exactly.
Okay, so in Chicago, we see how external violent forces can invade innocent lives right out in the open. But what happens when that external threat operates in the shadows of high society? That actually brings us right back to our opening scene in the freezing mountains of Sarnano, Italy in November 1980.
Right, the two women abandoning that warm running car. That was Jeanette, a wealthy antiques dealer, and the ex-wife of a prominent member of the Rothschild banking family, and her friend Gabriella, who was acting as her driver and translator.
And for over a year, there was absolutely no trace of them. But then in January 1982, hunters found their remains in a densely wooded, really steep ravine 8 miles from where their car was abandoned.
And the details of how they were found are crucial.
Yeah, because Gabriella was actually wearing a skirt. Now, the medical examiner officially ruled the cause of death as accidental exposure to the elements. But the physical evidence at the scene tells a completely different story, starting with their watches.
The watches provide a really crucial timeline anomaly. Jeanette wore a manually wound mechanical watch. It stopped on December 12th at 7:20 a.m.
Okay.
Gabriella wore a battery-powered watch. It stopped exactly 1 week later, on December 19th, at 7:30 a.m.
1 week and 10 minutes apart. That is highly specific.
And impossible to ignore. Plus, the mechanics of human freezing contradict the official ruling entirely.
Because of how hypothermia works.
Right. When individuals succumb to hypothermia, the profound confusion often leads to paradoxical undressing, or you'll see one person attempting to push forward for help while the other collapses.
So they wouldn't just be lying neatly together.
Exactly. Finding two victims lying together, fully clothed with their purses, 8 miles through a blizzard in a skirt. It heavily implies the location was a staging ground, not the site of an accidental death.
Yeah, this case is honestly like a spider web, where every single thread you pull just leads to a deadlier spider. Because I have to ask you, would you ever leave a running car in a blizzard unless someone terrifying was forcing you out?
Never. Not voluntarily. And to understand what actually happened, investigators had to pull apart the communications from right before they vanished.
What did they find?
Well, while staying at a local boarding house, a telegram arrived, addressed to Janine May, which was a pseudonym Jeanette sometimes used. The message simply read, "I am waiting for you," and directed her to a specific address in Rome.
And that address in Rome is where things just explode.
Yeah, tracing that address cracked the facade of an accidental death wide open. Law enforcement discovered that this specific location was already the nexus of a massive international criminal investigation.
But just wild.
Right around the same time Jeanette received her message, another telegram was sent to a director at Christie's auction house in Rome. It read, "Recovery is possible," and listed that exact same street address.
And this wasn't just out of the blue.
No, this occurred immediately following a highly sophisticated, multi-million-dollar art heist at Christie's.
So you have a high society antiques dealer going missing and a massive art heist occurring simultaneously, both linked to the identical drop point. There is zero chance that is a coincidence.
Zero. And the scope of the criminality at this address was staggering. Investigators intercepted 3 additional telegrams sent to the families of prominent kidnapping victims in Rome, demanding ransoms and directing them to this street.
So it's basically a hub for major crime.
Exactly. A raid of the premises uncovered a ring of South American operatives, including a woman who was already on bail for the abduction of a foreign ambassador.
And it connects right back to Christie's, too, because a director for the auction house actually lived on that very street. When police executed a search warrant on his apartment, they found illegal firearms, narcotics, and literal hand-drawn diagrams of the Christie security system.
Now, if you were listening to this and wondering how stolen art, kidnappings, and an antiques dealer all connect, you really have to look at the mechanism of money laundering within the mafia.
Because art is basically unregulated, right?
Right. Art is unregulated and totally subjective in value. A criminal syndicate can steal a masterpiece, sell it on the black market for a fraction of its worth, or use a corrupt antiques dealer to, quote-unquote, appraise and legitimize the stolen goods.
So they're converting illicit inventory into clean, untraceable wealth.
Exactly. And Jeanette, moving in the absolute highest echelons of European wealth, was the perfect intersection for this kind of enterprise.
It's like trying to trace a single drop of water back through a plumbing system. Every pipe you check just connects to a larger, more corrupt main line.
Yes, it's very true.
Because years later, police discovered Jeanette had financial ties to Sergio Vicari, an Italian antiques dealer who was brutally stabbed to death in London in 1982. And when investigators opened Sergio's safe deposit box, they found photographs of the specific antiques stolen during the Christie's heist.
And the intelligence surrounding Sergio Vicari darkens the picture even further.
Oh, it gets worse.
Yeah. Informants alleged Sergio was connected to the death of Roberto Calvi, who was infamously known as God's banker, due to his really close ties with the Vatican.
Wait, Calvi, wasn't he the one found hanging under a bridge?
Yes. He was found hanging beneath Blackfriars Bridge in London, and his pockets were stuffed with bricks and thousands of dollars in different currencies. It was a murder heavily tied to mafia money laundering through international banks. And Sergio reportedly carried a briefcase containing photographs of both Roberto Calvi and Jeanette.
Which honestly completely reframes those watches, stopping a week apart. They didn't wander into the snow and freeze.
No.
The evidence strongly suggests they were intercepted, likely held captive at a secondary location for weeks while financial leverage or interrogations took place, and then murdered. Their bodies were probably dumped in that ravine much later to stage a tragic accident.
It's horrific.
Yeah.
And, in Chicago and Italy, we examined external forces, syndicates, and thieves just invading innocent lives. But the investigative process changes entirely when the deception comes from inside the house.
When the person you think you know is hiding everything.
Exactly. When the victim is the architect of the deadly secret, the investigation becomes a process of dismantling a double life.
Which brings us to our final case. Let's move to Nashville, Tennessee. It's June 1998. A woman named Tuania is highly alarmed because she hasn't heard from her boyfriend, 23-year-old Marcus Rutledge.
And Marcus was known as a really devoted father who checked in constantly, right?
Yes, very reliable. So Tuania drives to his duplex. His car, which is this red Plymouth Neon, is gone. Fearing a medical emergency, she and Marcus's best friend, Ethan, pry open a back window to get inside.
But what they find is pretty disturbing.
The scene they find is visceral. Marcus's beloved Rottweiler is locked inside the bathroom. The dog is so desperately starved and dehydrated that it has literally torn apart and chewed through the bathroom carpet.
See, in behavioral analysis, this is what we call an absolute break-in pattern.
Even for someone running away.
Yes. Even if someone decides to voluntarily disappear, they rarely subject a beloved pet to agonizing starvation. Locking the dog in the bathroom indicates someone intended to return shortly, or someone else was in the apartment who wanted to secure the dog before removing Marcus.
That makes total sense. And when investigators begin interviewing Marcus's family, the psychological compartmentalization of his life really comes to light. His parents, who are living up in Michigan, are under the impression that Marcus is a dedicated college student at Tennessee State University, like mere credits away from graduation.
But the reality was starkly different.
Very.
Detectives found that Marcus had actually quietly dropped out of the university a full year prior. To maintain his lifestyle and the illusion of academic success, he had integrated himself into the local underground drug trade, primarily selling marijuana.
And there was the family secret, too.
Right. Furthermore, he had a 2-year-old daughter with Tuania, a child his parents in Michigan knew absolutely nothing about.
He basically built a massive firewall between his two lives. But when you operate in the drug trade, the people you associate with bring their own violent liabilities right into your orbit.
And that's where his best friend comes into the picture.
Exactly. Let's look at Ethan, the best friend who helped Tuania break into the duplex. When Marcus's parents met with Ethan to ask if he knew anything, Ethan's physical demeanor was highly suspicious. He was sweating profusely, pacing around, just vibrating with this nervous, panicked energy.
Well, Ethan eventually admitted to police that he and Marcus were actually partners in selling drugs.
Which explains the panic.
Right. And investigators strongly suspected Ethan was withholding the identity of whoever took Marcus. The pressure was definitely mounting on him, but Ethan never had the opportunity to confess.
Because in February 1999, just 8 months after Marcus vanished, Ethan was found shot to death on the floor of his own duplex.
But the violence didn't start with Ethan, did it?
No, it didn't. See, Ethan had recently allowed a man named Charles Brown Jr. to move in as a roommate, and Charles was spiraling. Ethan's family reported Charles was walking around the house wearing a literal bulletproof vest, deeply paranoid, telling people there was a hit out on his life.
And honestly, that paranoia was entirely justified by the timeline.
Well, so?
Because investigators discovered that on the exact day after Marcus disappeared in June 1998, Charles Brown Jr. was the target of a massive coordinated home invasion.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, multiple masked gunmen kicked in his door and sprayed the apartment with automatic gunfire. Charles barely survived.
Okay, but the detail that ties it all together is the getaway car. Eyewitnesses to the shootout saw the masked gunman fleeing the scene in a red Chevy Corsica.
And that's significant because...
Because if you look at the body style of a late 90s Chevy Corsica, it is virtually indistinguishable from a red Plymouth Neon, which is the exact make, model, and color of the car Marcus owned, the car that vanished from his duplex the day before the shooting.
Ah, I see. So the investigative hypothesis forms pretty quickly here. Marcus is intercepted or killed at his duplex. The assailants steal his red car, lock his dog in the bathroom, and use his vehicle the very next day to execute a hit on Charles Brown Jr., who was an associate within their drug network.
Right.
And then months later, Ethan is murdered, potentially to silence him from connecting the dots between Marcus's disappearance and Charles's attempted assassination.
So, if you are listening to this and wondering how on earth law enforcement misses this through line, I mean,
Yeah.
with Charles surviving a shootout in a matching car the day after Marcus vanishes and Ethan getting murdered months later,
Hmm.
how does law enforcement miss the connection here? It feels like the most obvious math in the world.
I know, it really does. And it highlights a profoundly frustrating reality of the justice system.
Mm.
The massive chasm between knowing what happened and actually proving it in a court of law.
The burden of proof.
Exactly. Law enforcement operates on the burden of proof. The timeline, the matching vehicle profiles, the shared criminal associates, all of that is circumstantial evidence. It suggests a really strong narrative, but it does not definitively prove who pulled the trigger. To secure a homicide conviction, prosecutors heavily rely on direct physical evidence. A weapon, DNA, or a body.
And they had absolutely none of those for Marcus. They did actually arrest Charles Brown Jr. for Ethan's murder eventually, but the district attorney was forced to drop the charges because the physical evidence connecting Charles to the gun just wasn't concrete enough for a jury.
It's so tough.
So without Marcus's body, the case just went completely cold.
Because the absence of a body removes the primary crime scene, the cause of death, and the forensic trace evidence needed to link a suspect to the specific act of murder.
And that forensic silence lasted for over a decade. The grim resolution finally came in 2010 when a hunter walking through dense woods stumbled upon a human skull. It was located roughly 13 miles from where Marcus's abandoned red car had eventually been found.
But it wasn't an immediate resolution, was it?
No, tragically. Due to severe backlogs in forensic testing and just awful bureaucratic gaps, that skull sat in an evidence locker for 14 years. It wasn't until 2024 that DNA testing definitively identified the remains as Marcus Rutledge, and today it is finally an active homicide investigation.
Synthesizing these three distinct investigations reveals a really sobering truth about human vulnerability.
It really does.
Whether the threat is the calculated explosive violence of a Chicago syndicate, the vast international money laundering networks of elite art thieves, or just the chaotic, desperate violence of a localized drug operation in Nashville, the common denominator is the devastating efficiency of concealment. When a life intersects with a hidden criminal mechanism, the truth can be buried deep enough to stall justice for generations.
As we close out this deep dive, there is a final unsettling thought I really want to leave you with. When we consume true crime, it is so easy to focus on the spectacular elements, the car bombs, the stolen masterpieces, the shootouts.
The cinematic stuff.
Right. But the truly terrifying core of these investigations is the fragility of human existence. It is the realization of how easily an entire life can be erased from the map, leaving the people who love them trapped in a torturous maze of unanswered questions and hidden realities. It really forces you to look around and wonder, how well do you really know the secret lives, the hidden pressures, and the silent decisions of the people sitting next to you right now? Keep asking questions.